My name is Toby Morantz. I'm an ethnohistorian, which means that I, I go back and forth between historic information and anthropological information, and I try to combine the two. And his ethnohistory is used in America and North America amongst peoples who did not leave their own records. It's no different than the histories that were written in other parts of the world where there was not a written language until recently, such as in Africa or parts of Asia, or even in North America or Europe where women did not write down their accounts. And so we have developed a manner of going through the archival records in order to tease out what we can learn about the people themselves. I've used the archaeological record as well as I've used archival records. I'll explain those in a minute. The use of archaeological record, even though it is older than where I start using the written documents, it provides opportunity to test out some of the information that you find that might be in error. So for example, an anthropologist by the name of Eleanor Laycock was quite certain that the Crees in the James Bay area were strictly caribou hunters, and as a result they could live in large groups of several hundred people, and this meant that when the fur trade came that they changed to a very large degree because they became beaver hunters. When you go back to the archaeological record, it is corrected. This notion is corrected because we see that throughout the years from the 1500s on, we find that in fact the Crees were living on small game such as porcupines and hares. So the archaeological record is very important. Let me say something very quickly about the sources I use. The archival records, first of all, there's the Jesuit relations that take us through the 1600s. These are records left by the Jesuits, as you know, who came over to New France with the French, and they wrote every year, they wrote an annual report to their superiors talking about their life amongst the native peoples of New France and the areas that New France was expanding into. We also have to keep in mind that these accounts, called the Jesuit relations, were intended for the public back in France. They were used as kind of travel adventures for people reading them, but also as a manner for the Jesuits to raise money. So we also have to be critical when we read them. The Jesuits, in the end, tended to prefer the sedentary communities, such as amongst the Hurons and in Quebec, and so we really don't have a very long period where the Jesuits are looking at the Cree, for instance, or other Inuit peoples in the Quebec-Labrador Peninsula. The records that over the years I've exploited the most are the Hudson's Bay Company records. They start in the 1670s when the Hudson's Bay Company established its presence, and I will get to that little more detail. And the post managers of each of the posts were required every year to send back their accounts of who came into the post, what they did, what they traded, what the climate conditions were, and we could even do a history of just the climate because every day we can look at the temperature, for instance, that was in the various areas that the Hudson's Bay Company was stationed. So the Hudson's Bay Company archives, again, have to be read keeping in mind they were written by white people. They were written as economic journals. They are not necessarily favorable to the native peoples because, of course, the Hudson's Bay Company is there as a merchant intending to make a profit. Now, we also have, fortunately, we have oral tradition. The oral tradition of the Crees, for instance, will take us back to eyewitness accounts. The Cree make a distinction between stories of long ago and more recent accounts, and those will go back about 3 generations. One of the reasons that we cannot count on the stories of long ago is because the Crees lived in small groups, and as they lived in small groups, these were family histories, and and the families changed. They moved, they died out, and so you don't get the longevity as you would in a written account that could be then passed on from generation to generation. In written materials, you get it, only small families remembering what their grandfather, for instance, may have told them. So we have to rely a lot on the written account, but again, the anthropologist will add to us a very a corrective to what you're finding in the records, because sometimes the records just don't make sense. For instance, some of the accounts in the historic records amongst for the Niskapi claim that, you know, very quickly they lost their skills of hunting with a bow and arrow, and we just know that isn't true. And we know that it's not true that very quickly they would have lost the means of making them. So you have to combine the anthropological, critical understanding that you have of society, whether it's Cree or Inuit, in this case that's who I've been looking at, with what we're finding in the records.